A couple months ago, I summited Mount Everest, and with that came a few near-death experiences, not only while climbing it, but also training for it. Fortunately, I'm still here today, but all of these risky and dangerous moments ended up being very valuable lessons that hopefully prevent similar experiences in the future for myself and maybe even you. So I'm going to share some of those and the footage that I have surrounding them. So we're going to start off, of course, on Everest, and you can guess that's going to be on summit day. So note, the majority of deaths do happen on summit day, from Camp 4 to the summits. Just let that be known. There's a lot in the Khumbu Icefall, but the majority have happened above the death zone, 8,000 meters. When you head from Camp 4 into the death zone at around midnight usually, you quickly realize why it is called the death zone. At 8,000 meters and above, the oxygen becomes so thin that your body can no longer adjust to that lack of oxygen. So you're put on oxygen masks, the majority of people, and you're sipping out of little masks connected to these bottles. You're on a lifeline. If you don't have this, you're dead. This, combined with summit day being the hardest day out of the entire expedition, makes it a near-death moment, I would say, the entire day, because if you don't have that oxygen, and if something goes wrong up there, there's a pretty good chance you'll die. In my experience, we headed for the summit at around 2 a.m. from Camp 4. Now, luckily, a lot of the lines that you might have seen go viral on social media, there was big crowds this year. Those were a couple days before us, so luckily we were moving up after all those lines. Those people had come down, so we had a pretty clear shot ahead of us making our way to the summits. So our whole team felt strong, but because of all these lines and groups that had been up right before us, just an hour into being in the death zone, we encountered a body. Obviously, I don't want to go into those details, but what it did was it put into perspective that there was people with the same motivation, same drive as us, and probably were just as prepared, but something went wrong and they never were able to make it back down. You can't really let this get in your head though, because, well, if you panic, then something like that can happen to you as well. So we continued moving up the triangular face, up to the balcony, which is the first location on the mountain where you can actually take a break. And at this point, you become much more exposed. From the balcony, we headed up to the south summit, and me and Furbo were flying on this, because once again, we're on a lifeline. We don't want to be up in the death zone for longer than we need to, so we're trying to get up and down as fast as we can. Once you get above that south summit, you come to the Hillary Step, which isn't historically the deadliest part of the climb, but it definitely is one of the most dangerous, especially this season. This season specifically, as I was saying, a couple days prior, there was many climbers that had summited and came back down. But there's two who did not make it back down because of a cornice collapse right on the Hillary Step. A cornice is just a piece of snow that's stuck in place, but beneath it is just nothing, essentially. So if you put too much pressure on that snow, it'll end up collapsing, which is what happened to two climbers as they were passing over it, and they're dead now. Maybe it was a lack of oxygen in my brain, but I didn't really process where the cornice collapse was. I heard about it, but I didn't know where it was. But this is me stepping over it. It's just incredibly narrow, steep on both sides, and even if you're attached to the fixed lines, it's still incredibly sketchy. So what I'm assuming happened was this was once a much more wide trail. But it seemed safer, and that's the key word, it seemed safer. So these climbers thought they could maybe clip around other climbers to get by them, or for whatever reason stepped on that part of it which triggered the collapse. They didn't know. Nobody could have told them. Maybe you could have used clues, okay, this looks a little bit sketchy, probably shouldn't step on it, but you never truly know if something can just collapse beneath you or not. It's the same thing with crevasses. You might be stepping on a snow bridge, it could instantly collapse. So that's why you clip into these fixed lines or you're on a rope team. So I felt fine and controlled in that situation. I didn't think that I was going to fall on either side. I'm luckily pretty good with my footwork. But the reason it's a little scary for me is because a lot of the time, me and my Sherpa were clipping around other climbers to pass them. We don't want to get caught up behind other climbers. We only have a limited amount of time to summit. So we might have to move up past them unclipped so we can make our push for the summit. Which is scary because sometimes we weren't on the trail. We were moving on what could have been cornices or just unknown. You don't know what's below it. But, of course, my Sherpa knows best and he wouldn't have brought us on some super sketchy, deathly cornice. Luckily, there was nothing that collapsed beneath us. We didn't run out of oxygen. The weather didn't get too poor that it kept us up there or we had to turn back. We summited. So really just proper preparation, decision making is key here. You have to make the decision, are we going to clip around these climbers or get caught up behind them? It looks safe. We're going to continue going up. Do I feel like my brain is swelling? Do I need to go back down? These are just decisions you need to make. Luckily, we made all the right ones. Nothing bad happened. Now, there's a few other very close calls on Everest that I experienced, but I also had plenty of near-death experiences while training for Everest, specifically on other high-altitude peaks. We're going to go into Chimborazo. So when I first set out to Everest, I wanted to get a feel for how my body reacted to the altitude, because if you're going to die, it's because of the altitude. So I set out to climb some Ecuador volcanoes like Chimborazo, which is just over 20,000 feet, and you climb it in 2 days. You do acclimatize with other peaks in the area, but you go up Chimborazo itself in 2 days. You push to the high camp, and then you go to the summit, and then you come all the way back down. That is no joke. 20,000 feet in 2 days, pretty much. Now, like I said, this was in light of preparing my body, seeing what my body was capable of so I could take on Everest. Very early into training. I had taken a 2-day mountaineering course in New Hampshire before this. We were unprepared, okay? I'm gonna make that clear. But essentially, the game plan was to acclimatize, prepare our bodies, get more red blood cells to take on Chimborazo by climbing a few other volcanoes and mountains, like Pasachoa, Iliniza, Cayambe, and Chimborazo. Cayambe being very key, because that gets up pretty close, 19,000 feet, I believe. Turns out, there was lightning striking around us on the morning of our summit push to Cayambe, and we didn't make it 30 minutes out the door. Iliniza, which we did summit, was only around 15,000 feet tall. So you can tell, as I'm getting up to high camp on Chimborazo, which is around 17,000 feet, I felt awful. I was ill, I was unprepared, headache, nausea, all this different stuff, and it was not looking too good for me at all. So when I woke up to head for the summits at 10 p.m., I wanted to die, but I pulled myself together. The issue was I had lost my appetite, which is very common to experience at high altitude, especially if you go up quick, and I didn't eat anything. Felt like garbage, but we continued and pushed out of the camp for the summits. I was slow, out of shape, and only a fraction of the power I have now, but we continued making our way up, despite the weather getting a little bit cold, windy, but it wasn't too much to be concerned about. What you'll end up noticing is a lot of the times you do feel horrible when you set out of camp on a summit push. But around a couple hours in, you actually start to feel much better, but you need to keep this momentum going. I had never been out for more than 3 hours, I would say, climbing. Maybe a couple times. I had no idea how to keep this momentum going, manage myself in these conditions, which the number one way is to stay hydrated and eat. And like I said, I had not eaten anything. My appetite was just not there. And you can imagine, once we got to 5 hours in, 18,000 feet, which is the highest we've been so far, I was on 200 calories. You can imagine, it wasn't looking too good for me. My guide, Manuel, could see I was running out of fuel, so to make sure I didn't fall down the mountain if I ended up stumbling or passing out or something like that, he put me on a very close short rope, which means I was attached to him with a rope, and if I ended up falling, he could technically be brought down with me, but he could ice axe arrest, which is just when you're falling and you dig this ice axe into the snow and it stops you. Easier said than done, but it's your best shots if you're both tumbling down the glacier. I continued pushing up the mountain with him, but at this point I was getting a little scared because every 5 to 10 minutes I had to take a break. I was bonking. It's just when your body completely runs out of fuel and you can't go any longer. There's around 2 hours left to the top, and realize, let's go back to Everest, this is why most people will end up dying on that summit push, is they expend all their energy going up, and they have nothing to get back down. So I didn't want this to happen to me, therefore I told Manuel, we have to turn back, but at this point, I had already expended all my energy. I had pretty much nothing left. So there we are, moving down Chimborazo's icy glacier. If you fall, you're going hundreds of meters down. I'm tumbling and stumbling. If I wasn't on the short rope, I would have just faded away off into the night. Luckily, Manuel was keeping me up though. Somehow I made it back down to high camp safely, and I just had to let Manuel know how appreciative I was, because if for some reason I was alone out there, and because I didn't eat, I didn't drink enough water, I didn't take the right precautions, I definitely would have died. And the reason why you need to be appreciative of your guides in these situations is because, well, they're risking their life bringing you up. If you fall and they don't catch the ice axe arrest, they're coming all the way down with you. So both of these scenarios I've mentioned, I've never directly faced death, I would say. But on my 2023 Denali trip, I was gonna die 3 times in the span of 30 minutes. And if you think I'm kidding, I went from a lukewarm believer in God to a genuine believer after this. So here I am, 4 months after Chimborazo, heading to Denali, America's tallest mountain. The good news is I'm much more in shape now. I realize the importance of getting food in your body, taking care of yourself, drinking enough water. But the bad news is I'm still an idiot. I'm always an idiot. You know, we all make mistakes, but this time I really mess up. I don't check my gear to make sure it functions properly on the mountain. On Denali, because it's in Alaska, very high in altitude, it can get very cold. So you gotta bring out these bad boys. The Olympus Mons cubes. They'll keep you warm, they'll prevent you from getting frostbite. But the issue with the Olympus Mons is, as you can see, they have a massive toe bale. This thing right here, very big. How is any crampon, which is the tool on the bottom of your boots that sticks into the snow, going to be able to fit on this? And remember, crampons are very important. You would not make it up 10 feet up Everest, Denali, Chimborazo without these, because they keep you on the mountain. So, you know, I'm putting together my gear. You know, this is the first time whipping out the Olympus Mons. These are the crampons I've been using. I look at this toe bale attached to the Olympus Mons cube toe box, and I think, it's all right. So we fly on a ski plane onto the glacier. We head to 7,800 camp, which is just a camp at 7,800 feet. Then we go to 11,000 feet camp, which is the same thing, just at 11,000 feet. Both of those were in snowshoes. But now, to make it from 11,000 feet to the camp at 14,000 feet, we're gonna need to whip out the crampons. And for reference, that's just because it was much more flat on the way to 11,000 feet versus 11,000 to 14,000 feet. If you fall, you might fall off the mountain, essentially. So luckily, I'm rocking these things from, 11,000 feet to 14,000 feet, and I actually didn't have any problems. I was filming, I was having a great time, it was some pretty crazy weather. But we get to 14,000 feet, and we're at the camp, and one of our guides, Justin, looks at my crampons and how it's connected to my boot. He says, that doesn't look too secure, my friend. I say, oh, we got up here all right. You know, it'll be good. We'll be all set. So now it's time for the most technical part of the entire Denali climb, the head wall. The head wall is essentially just a very long and very big face of the mountain that leads up to the 16 ridge. The good thing is there's fixed lines on it, so you can clip in with an ascender and a carabiner. So as you're moving up, if you end up falling, that ascender is going to catch you and you won't fall off the mountain. And thank God for these, because as we're moving up, we have these heavy packs on, putting a lot of torque on our boots and our crampons because of how steep and icy it is. That right one said I'm about to head out, everybody, because it just came right off my boot. That was the only thing keeping me securely on the snow and on the mountain, and all I had was one now, and I was hanging on to this fixed line, kind of panicking a little bit. So the good thing was my crampon didn't slide down the entire mountain. It was hanging on just by the straps. So one of our guides, Justin, he had to come back down and get my crampon on for me because I'm still a noob, and I still consider myself a noob, but there was no way I was going to be able to securely get this on by myself while hanging on by that rope. So I needed some help, and yeah, now I couldn't trust the one thing that was keeping me on the mountain though. So that was parts 1 of 2 of this near-death experience. Now, I was attached to the fixed lines. There was no inherent risk or immediate death I could have faced by my crampon falling off like that. If something had gone wrong, I'd just be belayed down, which, yes, would be embarrassing. But part 2, I did not end up having this luxury, as you'll see in a second. So after this first crampon incident, I was able to snag a crampon from another climber. He had the Olympus Mons, and luckily, his crampons worked perfectly on mine. So with that, I was able to push back up the head wall, over 16 ridge, into 17,000 camp. We slept that night, and now it was time to push for the summit. It was looking like an absolute divine day. The forecast was pretty good. There was a storm coming in tomorrow, but that wasn't coming in today. So we push up the Autobahn, which is the hardest part of summit day, and we get off the Autobahn, and the weather just takes an immediate turn for the worse. I mean, it was out of the blue. So we end up stopping and turning back just around 3 hours from the summit. Very bummed out, but it is what it is. That's just the mountains. you got to turn back. Nobody was pushing up in that. I mean, you would definitely get frostbite. So we go all the way back down, go through all, the head wall, 16 ridge, everything. We get to 14,000 camp, and it's caught up to us now. Even the worst news is now the guy that gave me his crampons needs them to get back down. So I'm stuck back with my golden boys here again. And then we begin our approach to Squirrel Hill, which is the first and last part of the climb where you actually need to use your ice axe if you do end up falling. Now again, this part isn't that steep, but it is steep enough that you can slide off of the mountain, therefore you need the crampons and ice axe. We have these incredibly heavy packs on, getting slammed back and forth by the wind on this part of the mountain. And as you can guess, the torque once again builds up on my right crampon and it just slips right off. So this time we don't have any ropes that we're clipped into that can just stop us immediately. So I start sliding down the mountain this time. I fell, I'm sliding down with a 50-pound pack. I have to turn over and I end up hitting the ice axe arrest. I mean, I was kind of excited with myself because I just hit an ice axe arrest. You never know if you'll be able to you practice doing them, but you never know if you'll be able to do it in a situation when it actually comes to saving your life. By digging into the snow, I stop myself, and then it hits me. Okay, we're in a storm. I'm putting my life at risk now, and also my team's, because I'm roped into them. They look back at me. I look up at them. They look back at me. I don't even know what they're thinking. They're just looking at me. They're definitely thinking, oh, who brought this kid? Who brought this kid to the mountain? So one of the guides comes and helped me put my crampon back on, but unfortunately for me, the same thing happens twice. And then finally Justin comes, he gets that thing back on, and we finally get off of Squirrel Hill, where we're not at risk of, one, crampons falling off, and two, if crampon falls off, we'd slide off the edge of the mountain. The thing that really sucks about the situation is because we're all roped together. So there's 3 other teammates with me that were on the single rope line, which is for this exact reason. So by me falling, and I'm in the back, so I'm dragging everybody down. Nobody can see if I fall. I have to yell, communicate that, which is very hard in these winds. You could not hear each other yell at all. So nobody would see and everybody would be caught off guard. And I'm essentially putting all of our lives at risk, especially my own, by not checking my gear, making sure it was good. But yeah, I mean, that was a very hard lesson for me to learn, and probably my most traumatic mountaineering experience. So now, instead of those crampons that I just showed you, I have these things, which I used on Everest. I learned. You can see it goes right into the toe bale. These things take an iron grip to get off. I'm never making that mistake again. And I make sure all my gear is tested very extensively before I go and use it on the actual mountains, which, please do this. Being unprepared, not making sure your gear works is for sure the number one reason why people get into hard situations, get frostbites, or just don't make it off the mountain at all. So that moment definitely tops the closest and nearest I've ever been to death, I would say. But there was also a few very close calls and sketchy situations while I was climbing Everest just a couple months ago. For instance, the Khumbu Icefall this year had a horrible route. It took much longer to get through because it was very zigzaggy. There wasn't a direct route. It took the Icefall doctors a solid few more days to actually find a route because it was so all over the place. For hours, we would be traversing under these giant ice seracs and ice glaciers that look like they could just fall on you at any moment. But the scary part is they can. You don't know. It's just all by chance. You can limit that chance by going at night or when it's colder, but these things could collapse at any moment. So because the route was much more confusing and took a lot longer to get through, you're putting your life at risk the longer you're inside here. There was a few times that nearby seracs had collapsed and you could hear them, or just mini avalanches and everything, which was a bit scary. But on the way down, the Khumbu Icefall had melted over so much. It had been so warm the last couple of days, and we knew as soon as we came up on it that this was going to be a little bit dangerous. Some of the crevasse gaps that weren't initially big had opened up 5x since we had maybe gone through the first time. Like this one here, you have to jump over a pretty decent sized gap with, I had 45 pounds on my pack. You had to jump from that onto this small snow platform, which doesn't even look stable. And then you have to jump over the final gap to get to the other side. So I'm usually fine with jumping over the crevasse gaps and everything, but the unstable platform you had to go on was definitely, that didn't look very nice. Another scary thing that was going on up there was the constant triggering of avalanches, which is kind of on theme with what I just talked about, but avalanches that just take place anywhere on the mountain. Now you'll figure out if you ever go on a high altitude expedition that on Denali or Everest, you constantly hear avalanches around you, multiple times a day. Once again, as we were moving our way down from the summit, in between the Lhotse face and Camp 2, I witnessed one of the biggest avalanches I had ever seen on that Everest expedition and probably in my life. This is an avalanche falling right down the face of Nuptse, but it's also going across the climbing routes that you would take if you were to climb Nuptse, which makes it a little bit concerning because if you had been climbing through that avalanche definitely would have wiped you out. Thankfully, me and this other guy that were standing around watching it were pretty far away, but that's the closest I've ever been to an actual avalanche that could have potentially killed you if you were on that route. So both of those instances I just mentioned are mostly a factor of chance. You can never fully know if an avalanche is going to trigger or a serac is going to collapse. I mean, there's ways to tell, but you never fully know. But this next close moment was a bit different because it was just the foolishness of another climber, I would say. But as we were moving down from Camp 4 to Camp 3, we came up across the yellow band, which is a pretty technical part of the climb because it's very rocky. While we were going down, it got pretty flooded with climbers. Here, there's 2 ropes, one to go up and one to go down. Nobody should be going up and down at the same time. There should only be one person on this section at a time and they should be waiting for each other to pass. But this guy right here just didn't care at all. As I was on the down rope, going down, I got on before him. He decides to take the up rope and says, "I'm gonna go down too, brother, watch out." So I'm watching my footwork, making sure I'm stepping on actual rock and don't just slip and fall. Even though I'm clipped in, I'm going down. So if I fall badly enough, I actually will fall to the next snow anchor, which wouldn't be good, especially on the yellow band. So he's coming down. Now I have to watch for this guy's crampon flying into my face and taking me out that way. We both ended up getting off the yellow band without him bumping into me or anything like that, but I just don't know why he couldn't wait literally 5 minutes and just make a not initially dangerous situation dangerous. So yes, climbing is risky. I know that. Everybody who climbs does. But the difference between the people who look at this risk and make it down from the mountain and don't make it down from the mountain is the person who makes it down mitigated the risk as much as possible. They made the right decisions. They prepared properly. They looked at previous close experiences and learned from them. With that being said, I'm incredibly fortunate that I was able to turn all of these lessons, as I call them, into learning experiences. So hopefully you all were able to take something away from these. Thank you for watching. Subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.